Louise, you want to get us kicked off before we, because I'm so excited to talk with our panelists today. I'm ready to jump in. I don't want to get sidetracked, so uh,
Okay.
go ahead, get us started.
All right, I got you. Hi, welcome everybody. I'm Dr. Luis Santiago. I am the director of the Graduate School of Education here at Thoreau University, California campus. I'm so excited. Dr. Vajra Watson is joining us today to kick off our spring Diversity Now series. Dr. Ijeoma Ananuju has been such a fabulous facilitator of this series, so he's going to take it over from me. But I want to stop first and recognize that Thoreau University, California sits on the traditional, unceded lands of the Karken people, one of the 8 Ohlone tribes in the Bay Area. That was part of the unratified treaties of 1851 and 1852. Solano County is also the historic home to various tribes of the Patwin and Miwok peoples. And I also want to just recognize and welcome all the stolen peoples who have joined us here in this world, in this nation that we have today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to a fabulous conversation, first of our spring series in Diversity Now.
All right, thank you, Louise. Appreciate that. So we're excited to be kicking off our series again, and we have went and tapped one of the great minds of this generation to be with us today. We have with us Dr. Vajra Watson, who is the Ed Leadership Faculty Director at Sacramento State University. She is also the founder of Sacramento Area Youth Speaks, which is near and dear to my heart because that's where I had an opportunity to meet Dr. Watson. But more importantly, just on a personal note, Dr. Watson has been, oh man, she has served a variety of roles for me in my life. She has been a mentor. She has been a sister. She has been an advocate and an ally. And I am just so honored to have her here with us today to talk about how we getting rid of all the whiteness in the world. And so we are going to have a fantastic conversation. Dr. Watson, I just want to let you know, I have read through your article on what is a world without whiteness a few times. And I've taken notes, I've highlighted, I've marked up the paper, like such an awesome article that you wrote. But, I just wanted to give you the floor and see if you had any opening words before we got into some of my questions. You might even answer all my questions in your opening words.
No, well, first and foremost, I'm so honored to be here, to be in dialogue with you, Dr. Ananuju, and just to launch this spring series. I consider you, a colleague in this work, but even more importantly, a comrade in terms of really thinking through how we change schools, but also change ourselves in the process of that, and really see this as incredibly sacred and revolutionary work. I wrote that piece in lieu of the murder of George Floyd, and we spent time after that watching monuments come down around the world of colonizers. We also then witnessed on January 6th, white supremacists, obviously storm the Capitol in an insurrection. And, as I watched that on the news, like so many people around the world, I thought, I'm not a family psychologist, so I don't look into people's families and say what it is that was happening at your kitchen table that turns you into a explicit and outspoken white supremacist. What I study, like you, I study schools, and I study and think a lot about how schools reproduce racism. And even going deeper into that, how are we as white people, my people, implicated in the fight for racial justice? And what does it really mean? There was there was this amazing picture floating around on the internet after the Capitol insurrection that showed all people of color. It was all people of color actually as janitorial staff cleaning the mess of white people. And I saw that and it just made me pause, because so often I think diversity and the work of anti-racism continues to fall on the shoulders of Black, Indigenous people of color. And so how do we implicate ourselves as white people and move away from this notion of white fragility to white accountability? So those are things that I wrestle with a lot. I've been wrestling with a long time. I think about that in relation to school and racial justice and curriculum and teachers and community education and all these things. So that's broad. I can talk on and on, but I'd rather be in conversation with you.
I got a feeling this chat board is going to light up in a second as folks begin to hear what you have to say. There's man, I've been going back and forth on where to begin, just from reading your article. But I think I'm gonna go here and ask you about this passage. Let me just read it. You say, whiteness is visible, invisible, and can seem invincible, which is all part of its dangerous allure. It creates delusions of power that we unconsciously perpetuate and defend. It is imperative that we lift the veil on the manipulative nature of white supremacy. Let's see it for what it is. As you just said in your statement, like we look at schools, we look at how schools are impacting our communities and our babies. Can you speak to this passage in the context of what is happening in the classroom every day?
Yeah. So, the allure of whiteness, that it's always kind of shape shifting, because white people did not get race real. So when your identity is actually based on a fabrication, it is based on deceit and based on a lie, it's, for any of us as human beings, if you tell a lie, it keeps spinning. It becomes this evasive thing to even pin down. So it shape shifts like a ghost, because you're really trying not to get caught in the truth. So the truth is, whiteness is not real. And, us as white people, as we kind of navigate, Malcolm X said, if white people would study ourselves, or study white people in truth, we would become anti-white. And that's not to say that there needs to be shame in whiteness, but I think there needs to be new kinds of identities in relation to our whiteness. And so as you talk about or ask about this notion of like in school, so if me and you took a random school, walked in through a school, walked to the hallways of a school, kindergarten, 11th grade, what have you, anywhere in this country, we would probably see echoes of the following. We would see echoes of the following: that white people are the center of civilization and progress. We could probably viscerally feel it in the way that Eurocentricity gets centered and white people and whiteness gets centered. We could find it in the curriculum, right? That white people are the majority and the norm. So even we could be in a meeting and it's like, oh, when we think about the achievement gap, and we are always kind of looking at students in comparison to whiteness, that white people actually own this world. We could experience and witness echoes of that. Who the majority of Black men on a high school campus are what? The teachers or the security guards. That's also about ownership and property and the actualization of racialized patterns, and just this notion that whiteness is real and the way that it's kind of taught and perpetuated. So I would say that there's layers to how whiteness gets perpetuated. And unfortunately, racism happens in a lot of places, but the factory of racism is schooling. And, I could just say, and I'm sure you got other questions and you're getting serious and all that.
No, go ahead.
But, I just think it's important to acknowledge, just some of the extraordinary mentors and teachers that I had, kind of helping me with like tremendous grace to think about these issues. So I think about 8th grade, Lydell X, whose family was in the Nation of Islam. And, I was raised in a Sufi Muslim household. So I thought I knew everything about Islam, and Lydell thought he knew everything about Islam. And we would debate. And he would be like, "You're such an ignorant little white girl." And I would be all huffy puffy, junior high, like, "What you mean?" And he'd be like, "Go read James Baldwin and I'll finish a conversation with you." And I would go read James Baldwin just so I could go back and like have this debate. And he'd be like, "You don't know anything about Islam unless you've read the autobiography of Malcolm X." So I think about at a relatively young age being in conversations with someone who was so steeped in a knowledge of himself and history and really like prompted me to go in search of knowledge. At the same time, he sparked something in me. So, by 8th grade, we had to do these iSearch papers and folks were like, "Are dolphins smart?" And, folks were like asking those, it's 8th grade. And so I asked, why does racism exist? And that was my question that I was delving into the library in 8th grade. So it was not a shock that come 9th grade, come going into high school, I could have easily taken the kind of pathway of all the other white kids, which was to go into like the general education classes. But, I enrolled in the Black Studies department and the Chicano Studies department. And at the time, that was the only departments that existed at the high school level at Berkeley High. And so I was the only white girl in those spaces. And one of the things, because there's many stories to tell, but to honor the teachers that allowed me into those spaces as a truth seeker and really gave me tremendous lessons about privilege, about the way that my whiteness was being manifested in the space, consciously and unconsciously. And I'll just say that at one point, as I was getting more and more active in the Black Studies department and the Chicano Studies department, at one point, I was cornered by the white teachers who were the head of the history department. And like, I won't name their names because it's a small world in education and they're still around. But they said, you need to get out of those departments. You're spewing the same venom that Malcolm X used to talk, and you're being brainwashed by Black people. I mean, just, the red face yelling at me, the whole thing. And I remember I had my backpack on and I was like in the corner, little white girl. And I was like, "I'm not in these classes learning what it means to be Black." And they said, "Well, what are you learning?" And I said, "I'm learning what it means to be white." And they were like, and that was such a gut reaction to being attacked for trying to unlearn and undo aspects and really understand whiteness. And so, this was in the mid 90s. A lot has happened, in my own life and in the world, but I do reflect on those moments at a relatively young age and am grateful for the Black Studies department, grateful for the Chicano Studies department, because I think that it has helped me in my kind of commitment to this work, since I've left those spaces.
It's interesting. There's a couple things that came to my mind. I'll just kind of work backwards in my thoughts. Um, I was just thinking, like, I was writing a paper on anti-racism, and as part of writing that paper, I was reflecting on you, and not just you, but reflecting on the lineage, the scholarly lineage, right, that I was birthed out of.
Mhm.
Um, but then I also began to think about the geographical place that I was birthed into, right, and just the idea that, like, part of being from, you know, California, specifically speaking, part of being from the Bay Area is you have access to folks who are going to challenge you and who are going to open your eyes and awaken you into this critical culture of, like, don't be blinded by the lies and the deceit, right? Like, here's the truth. But it's never just a here's the truth and you accept it. It's always a go read this book and then come back and let's have a conversation. Go read that article and come back and let's have a conversation. So it's not that people are telling you what to think, but they're giving you the knowledge and giving you an opportunity to wrestle with it and grapple with it and being willing to engage in those conversations, even if they disagree with you or you disagree with them, but we're talking about it. And next thing you know, you're like, man, thinking like this is natural, right? Thinking of a world without whiteness is a radical idea, but in as much as it is radical, I think it is natural when you have been birthed in that type of mindset. The other thing I was thinking, I'm glad you kind of, like, you mentioned his name, James Baldwin, um, but he wrote in his talk to teachers, I think, which is one of the most brilliant speeches I've ever read. He says, what is upsetting the country, and again, he said this in 1963, and here it is 2021, and it's still relevant. But he says, what is upsetting the country is a sense of its own identity. If, for example, we managed to change the curriculum in all the schools so that Negroes learned more about themselves and their real contributions to this culture, you would be liberating not only Negroes, you'd be liberating white people who know nothing of their history. And the reason is that if you're compelled to lie about one aspect of anybody's history, you must lie about it all. And I think that resonates with what you just said in terms of saying to folks, I'm not learning about Blacks. I'm learning about myself. I'm learning about what it means to be a white person. And I'm learning about that through the lens of their history and their real contributions to this world. And the reason why you think that I'm being brainwashed is because you've been lied to. Mm-hmm. And you haven't had access, or you haven't been willing to expose yourself to this truth. And so those are just some things that I was just thinking about as you were talking, like, wow, like, this is really making sense to me as you were speaking. I'm trying to keep up with the chat box as well, because there are some folks who are commenting. Let me see. Let me go back to your article. All right. You gave us 20 ideas to help move us forward. I think my favorite one out of the 20 is, like, number 19, where you just simply say, my son recently asked me, will white supremacy take the world with it? And I read that. I was like, wait a minute, that's not an idea. But then the more that I read it, I was like, I guess the question in and of itself is an idea that makes you think. But that one is my favorite. Part of it is my favorite because, I'm thinking of your son. But out of those 20, what are the one, two, or three that you're like, this is where we need to start?
It's such a good question. Well, one, I think it's important for us to briefly pause and understand that whiteness is such a new idea. I think that it can feel like very powerful and very old, but in the arc of human history, the notion of white people and whiteness is about like this big. Now, white people in this amount of time of power have done unimaginable damage to humanity, unimaginable damage to the earth, and unimaginable damage to ourselves. We have spent hundreds of years trying to take ourselves out of the human story in order to say that we're superior. So it puts it in context, right? The notion of a world without whiteness shouldn't even be radical, because you think about it's just a world outside this little time frame. But what is it going to take for whiteness to let go of itself? What is it going to take for whiteness to let go of herself?
Can I I had to replay that in my mind real quick, but you just kind of blew my mind there, because yeah, you're right. Like the thousands of years that has existed before this time period was a world without whiteness.
Yeah.
But you never think of that, right? Like you do always tend to think of like whiteness always is like, nah, bro, like there was a world that existed, but man, okay, I'm sorry, keep going.
Well, Elijah Muhammad said, if you control the diameter of a person's mind, you can control the circumference of their behavior. And so if our diameter is set to believe in whiteness, then it's pervasive, it's everywhere. If we start to unlock ourselves from that point in history, then it starts to become very rational to live in a world without whiteness, not just imagine it, but actually start to embody it and live it really strategically. But when I said that small point in the kind of damage being done, I mean, I think that I would be hard pressed to find from a rational perspective, someone that could really just say whiteness is going to last forever. I mean, we see whiteness attacking whiteness, imploding. I mean, it's lies. There's all this destruction, and it's like, okay, so whiteness from within will probably implode. In our implosion, will we take the world with it? Now, that's a great question. That's my son asked that question. I said, oh, wait, hold up. Let me write that question down. I like that question. And I ask people that question because I think that, personally, I don't think that it will take the world with it. I don't think that, but I think it's going to take people really becoming change agents. So I would say that I like number 19, plus, the future. You got to listen to the future to know where you're going. Another one that I think is really essential is this piece from my nephew who said, "Do you wish you were born Black?" I think in the era of like the Rachel Dolezals, in the era of white women pretending to not be white, in the era of the Kardashians, where it's like, I just want to purchase this body part or look this kind of way. I think that there is a lot of work that needs to happen, that white people can look at ourselves in light of our history, in light of our privileges, in the light of truth, still look in the mirror and say, I love you. Because until we actually can be at home in our humanity, and we were born pale, we were born white in this world, like there is a lot that needs to be unpacked with that. But there, I don't think should be shame in it either. I don't think shame creates progress. And so again, it was that gut reaction, like God doesn't make mistakes. Like I need to love who I am, just like you need to love who you are. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think white people are there yet. I think part of the pains and evils of whiteness is always trying to be something else. So I'm not really trying to be white, but I'm trying to put everyone else down, or I'm trying to take this from, Indian culture, and I'm trying to take this from, Laotian culture, and I'm trying to take this from South Africa, and it's all about cultural theft. No, there's another way to operate in the world where you're not trying to take from everybody else, because you learn to love yourself. And the third one, what's the third one? I don't know. What's the third one? I would say the notion that the notion number 3, in terms of the notion of like an ecosystem of oppression. And an ecosystem of oppression in the sense that if we're not understanding all the facets of oppression, we are not doing the work. And so often when we think about diversity work and multicultural work, and we lean towards studying those who are oppressed, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and whiteness continues to become this kind of blindness where it's like nobody is studying up, no one is studying privilege. There was, I had colleagues at a university who started like a center to study poverty. And I said, how do you study poverty without studying wealth? They're like, oh, no, we just want to study the poor. But wealth makes poverty. It's an intersection. Racism makes whiteness and the other way around. So you can't, so in terms of being folks that want to undo oppression, we have to look at it from all angles. Those are the 3.
I have a question for you, but let me just read a couple of the comments that are in.
Okay, because I'm not watching the chat. I probably should.
It's all good. That's how you know you're doing good, when you don't get questions, you just get comments. Monica Berger says, I appreciate everything you're saying. I relate to your story. Same thing. I was the only white girl in the Black study classes. And the same thing, I was accused of being brainwashed by jungle music. Because I was the only person in high school that listened to reggae music. And so thankful that I seeked out the truth and knowledge myself, because otherwise I would be oblivious like the majority of the white mainstream, because we're segregated on purpose, and we white people need to break through that ourselves. I have Michael B says, cultural theft. I like that so much better than cultural appropriation, as theft is much closer to the reality of the situation. Freddie Castro says, thank you so much for sharing that powerful story. It's a telling sign of the historical inopportunities for students of color. The educational system was geared towards enhancing those inequalities and raising white privilege. Crazy to think that even in the 90s, the very educators in public schools harbored these deep-rooted feelings against other cultures of color. How do you look towards recognition and acceptance of the privileged people don't want to realize? And then finally, Lisa Norton says, it is so hard with the intersection of being a woman and white to strip this down, as we have been force-fed so much racist and sexist bullshit. This is an important statement. We must continue to do the self-work and the community work. So Dr. Watson, you got folks really feeling what you're saying on a deep level. I have a question for you. It's really more of some advice that I'm hoping that you can give folks of color, folks who are Black like myself. What I wanted to ask you was kind of following up on what your son was suggesting, right? If whiteness implodes. If whiteness implodes and Blackness replaces it, my question to you was going to be, has whiteness really died? And as I was thinking about that question, what I wanted to add on that was that the allure of whiteness is that it's an ideology. And as an ideology, it is something that can change face. So the tenets of the ideology doesn't care if it's whiteness, if it's Blackness, if it's Asianness. It is an ideology that placates to those who are the dominant power at that time. And so my question to you now is going to be, as we dismantle and eradicate whiteness, how do we do that without putting something else in its place that just perpetuates the same system?
These are great questions. These are just so good. These are so good. I'm so grateful for conversation with you, Ijoma. I do think that our origin story is really important for our future story. And so if the world starts with whiteness, then it makes sense that we get entrapped into the psychology of a white ideology and a white kind of colonial framework. But if whiteness itself is not real, and so our quest really is to return to something that is older and deeper and rooted to something else, then I think it's not a question of replacement. Then I think it's a question of repatriation, and like ideological repatriation, in the sense of like, what is the source of your being? What is the source of your becoming? And so one of the things that I think was really fundamental in the Black Studies classes at Berkeley High that was different than the Black Studies classes at UC Berkeley, which I didn't take many of as an undergrad. At Berkeley High School, it was fundamentally grounded in a belief of like the Black man and Black woman are the original man and woman of planet Earth, and a really deep understanding of the civilizations of the Dogon people of Mali and the original universities that were, in Timbuktu and, East Africa and West Africa. And it was a very African-centered kind of knowledge base. And so it was a study of systems that really predated colonialism, and then just an understanding of how, it's not just a replacement of a white ideology. It's returning to something that has a great and vast history. And that's not to romanticize it either. But one of the challenges, I think, is this notion of what it means to abolish borders. Because the creation of borders is so wedded to whiteness and property and ownership. And I think oftentimes we can become very radical, but still live in the umbrella of nationalism. And so it's, how do I make America great? Because I helped build America. And yet that is still, in my opinion, because there are many people that will disagree with this, I think that is still being wedded to an ideology of enslavement. And the act of abolishing borders individually, as well as at the inner, what have I internalized about borders and my identity at the individual level, at the interpersonal level, and then at the institutional level. Because if we even think about at the institutional level, do I follow the borders of like my professional, this person's staff, this person's faculty, these are all the hierarchies that are so ingrained in us. So someone wants to act like, I'm this revolutionary decolonialist, and then, talk down to the person that's, the janitor or whatever, you know what I mean? And so abolishing borders is kind of an ever-present practice that this is a global, think about, Malcolm X and the internationalization of what it means to be free. And so, I don't know. I mean, that was my like hit on that question. And the other little piece I just want to say, I so appreciated someone said like policy is our love language. And I really like that, because one of the challenges I think of this work, because equity starts with autobiography, it's very important to be able to do the deep dive in our family stories. But we can live our whole lives in that layer, right? That equity starts with autobiography, somewhat individualistic layer of awakening. But I think we still have to really try to push ourselves to build systems to conceive of policies that are not nationalistic, but that are liberatory. It's just something that I wrestle with.
I don't know if this complements what you were saying, but you talking made me think of retributive justice.
Mm.
And I always caution against it, because when you are seeking justice through a lens of retribution, it's always about trying to get back what was stolen from you. Um, and don't while I don't disagree that I personally, as a Black man, want to get back what has been stolen from me, I have to acknowledge that getting back what was stolen from me means that I have to oppress someone else. And the reality I think I'm starting to accept is that when I talk about love and I talk about forgiveness, as much as those words pain me as someone who has been wronged, I understand that I cannot create a new world in their image.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I seek out retributive justice, that's what I'm doing, because I'm seeking to flip the scales. I'm seeking to be the one in power and the one who now oppresses, right? Versus I'm going to just kind of chop it up to the game and create a society that does not necessarily make me superior, right? But truly creates a system of inequality where we all can exist. And we could probably go down that rabbit hole all day. But there are two terms that you mentioned earlier, and I was hoping you could define them for us, just in case folks may not have heard of them or don't have a definition. You talked about white fragility and white accountability. For those of us who don't know, could you tell us what both fragility and accountability mean in this context?
Yeah, I think that, many of us white folks are, the Achilles heel of being positioned in society as the oppressor with privilege is that we can swim in that ocean and never see the water, right? We're not othered on a daily basis. And so because of that, we live with blinders on, and we are raised in bubbles of blindness. The fragility is when you start to realize or come into some type of moment where it's like, I'm white. Wait, what? Like, what is this? It can almost feel like someone just kind of slapped you awake. And when someone slaps you awake, there's a shuddering that can happen in the soul that can land in the ego. It can land in defensiveness. It can land in a lot of white tears. That's white fragility. One of my colleagues, Robin DiAngelo, wrote the book White Fragility, and it's really just trying to get white people with the comfort level of saying, I'm a white person and you a white person, white. That's, because she's trying to wrestle us out of white fragility and this white blindness. But the critique of that is that it in many ways further babies white people as needing to be coddled into the work of racial justice. White accountability does not start with white fragility. White accountability says we are implicated, period. Do the work. And if you want to cry while you're doing the work, it's on you, but do the work. And so I just think it's an important shift in the conversation, because it starts with responsibility, and it actually starts with our humanity. And I think it's more productive.
I was working at a camp. This is about 6-7 years ago. The camp was for white parents who had adopted Black and brown babies. And at the end of camp, we had a very frank conversation with the executive director of the camp about issues pertaining to us as Black folks, as Black staff, who were serving white parents with Black children, and the real visceral feelings that we were getting every day, having to deal with that. And I remember the executive director began to cry in that circle. And what happened when she started crying was the work stopped. The group no longer felt compelled to tell their story because now they felt compelled to wipe her tears. And I just remember kind of standing up in that group and saying to them, like, what are you doing? Like, you are so concerned about her feelings in this moment, now that she's being faced with this reality of what we experience every day as staff, that you have forgotten about your own cause and began to take care of her. And so that's why I think white accountability becomes so important, because white fragility, it not only has the power to shield you, but it has the power to change entire conversations. And if you are dealing with a group of people who don't know how to effectively guard against that, even if you are well-meaning, all of a sudden those folks have now become complicit in your fragility. And so that accountability piece, that ensuring of, sometimes you got to save your tears for later because the work has to be done right now, and keeping that at the forefront. I really do appreciate that. Dr. Watson, we got like about a little bit more than 15 minutes left. Is there any place in this conversation that we have not gone that you feel like we need to go?
One is, I want to just give this definition because I love it and I just discovered it. And I'll cite it afterwards, but I think it's a really important nuance. White supremacy is the what? White people are typically the who, and whiteness is the how.
So, wait, say that again. I got to write that down.
So when we think about whiteness as ideology, and we need to unpack that, because you just asked me to let's unpack white fragility. Did that. Let's unpack white accountability. Did that a little bit. But let's start now trying to unpack this ideology.
Yeah.
Right? So white supremacy is the what? White people are typically the who, like the who that enacts it. And whiteness is the how. Whiteness is it's how it's operationalized and materialized on earth. So like yesterday, this book dropped. I'm really loving it. That's where this comes from. Bree Pickhauer's. The book is Reading, Writing, and Racism, Disrupting Whiteness in Teacher Education in the Classroom. But that one sentence, I put the book down for that sentence, and I'm like, oh yeah, it made me hungry.
The powers that be on the Torah call, can we get that book? I think we need that book ASAP.
You got it. I'm working on it.
And I'm bringing her to help launch her book too on March 10th for a free webinar, so we can continue to build. And but that right there, that sentence made me call her. I said, oh yes, I'm feeling that one.
Typically in my philosophy class, typically in my philosophy class course, I always include Althusser.
Yeah.
Because Althusser's conversation around ideology, I think, is really important for us to understand how things kind of become ingrained in the DNA. What I like about what you just did is you connected it to the point that I was making earlier about if whiteness implodes and blackness takes over, has whiteness really died, because the what can change, the who, right? Like these things can become, it could be black is the what, and then black people are the who, and then whiteness then just transform into blackness, because we begin to understand the ideology on a whole another level, you know what I mean? And not just, and that's the thing that I think folks have to understand is, particularly when I talk about whiteness, I'm talking about something as an ideology that is not exclusive to white people. However, white people becomes its focus group, you know what I mean? And white supremacy becomes the engine behind it. But you can be black and subscribe to whiteness. And that's that allure, that's that power. And to eradicate that, man, that's we got to get that. But Louise came on screen. She was like,
I want to tell you, I want to thank Tamara, our head librarian, director of the library services. Actually, Tamara Trujillo is in the audience today, and she's already posted saying she's ordering it for the library. So exciting that our students will be able to check out copies of the book as well. And Dr. Watson, please share the webinar link with us, and then we'll put it on our website and we'll send it out to our audiences as well, because that's super exciting.
Yep. So I just put them in there, and hers is on Wednesday, March 10th. It's a lunch and learn, but I put the series in there, and I'm always about collaboration. So I love that. I appreciate that.
So you know what that means for all of our attendees. Wednesdays in the month of March is just going to be, that's just going to be
on fire. That's all.
Yeah. You got to go to Dr. Watson's talks, and then you got to come to us later in the afternoon. And look, you might not be the same after March. That's what we call the true March Madness right there. I love it. Man, I'm running out of questions. That.
I got a little bit.
Yeah. Keep me going.
Keep you going. You know, I would love for people to like read the piece. You know, it's just like on Medium. It's totally open. And I just want to, for the white people that are here on the, you know, on the call, I just think about, who are we 7 generations forward? And, you know, do we exist? And what is the work we have to do today, almost to destroy ourselves 7 generations from now? And I turn to this quote that I love so much, where it says, "What if we began at a kind of unachievability?"
I'm reading it right now. Oh my God, we at the same spot. I was going to ask you about it next. Keep going.
What if we began there and still proceeded? Not because we'll win, but because we'll have an experience within our activities. The transformation is the work. It is the walk. It is the journey, even more than it is the destination. And so I say that because I think that what is a world without whiteness, as we started in the beginning, can almost seem insurmountable, but that we are centering whiteness, or rather, we're centering whiteness momentarily to dismantle it, but understanding that it is part of a necessary undoing. If in generations, not in this moment, but in generations, will we be able to reconnect ourselves with humanity? It is going to take a radical awakening. It is not easy. And, you know, it might not be something that we necessarily have in our lifetimes. And yet, what we don't want is for our children and our children's children to continue to experience the world of white supremacy as we know it now. And so it's radical revolutionary work. And it's going to take a lot of accountability in the ways that we call each other out and call each other up. And so I'm a very optimistic person in that, in the possibilities of it. But I also just want to end with the awakening for white folks. Because I know, Ijoma, you said, okay, white ideology and everybody can manifest a white ideology. It was true. Yes. The awakening and work that we have to do as white people is different. It is unique. We created the mess. It is our responsibility to clean it. It is our responsibility to take on the weight of why are we the killers? Why are we the looters? Why is it us with our knee on George Floyd's neck? Why do we murder like this? Why do we lynch? Why can't we embody our own humanity? Those are questions that we have to ask ourselves as a people. Other folks might be able to ask those questions, wrestle with those questions. I think it was like, H. Brown back in the day said, Black people need nationalism. White people just need to find some love. And so I just say that, the commitment, man, the commitment day in and day out, it's easier said than done. But I appreciate I don't get to have a lot of these kind of conversations. I appreciate it.
So that I was literally looking at that quote. I was like, if you don't talk about this, we're going to get this idea of unachievability in 2021. I think so far the focus for me has been faith. The word says faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. We become thwarted in life because we rely too much on our eyesight. And I'm totally in agreement with that quote, that if I'm purely just looking through my eyes, then I will feel as though the dismantling of whiteness is a kind of unachievability. But I think when you are in the work that we are in and you are pursuing the outcomes that we are pursuing, you are at base a faith walker, meaning that you're walking not by sight, but by the vision that you have been given as a warrior in this work, right? And faith then becomes the substance that you lean on for that walk, and it becomes the evidence of a future that you have not seen, that I have not seen, that none of us have seen, right? And so for me, that's the connection that I made when I first read that statement, because I know my life is a testimony of me pursuing things that to my eye seem unachievable. And if we all can keep in mind the things that we thought were unachievable that eventually we achieve, then we will begin to understand the dismantling of this in a way that we haven't understood it before. Doc, I know we about to leave, and I'm gonna give you the last thoughts before we cut out. But can I just share a quick story with the folks?
100%.
So I owe a lot of credit to Dr. Watson for being here today because of one interaction in particular that I had with her. A lot of people don't know, but I used to think of myself as a poet. I know y'all looking at these pearly whites and this chocolate skin, and y'all like, there's no way. But I used to think I was Don Juan with the pen, and I worked day and night to write this beautiful poem that I presented in front of a room full of people, Dr. Watson being one of the people that was in that room. And she came up to me afterwards and she said, "Brother, that wasn't a poem. It was a dissertation. You need to go get your PhD and give up this poetry thing." And from that point on, I had clarity in my life. So thank you, Dr. Watson, from steering me into the direction that I was supposed to go in all along.
Well, I appreciate that story. I remember it. I remember it vividly. I remember you standing there. I was like, ooh, this is like the lineage of Du Bois, and I'm getting to witness it. And it just, as you said in the beginning, just now, this whole notion of like live your legacy. And that means that you're living your past, your present, and your future simultaneously. And then I was also struck where you said, what I wrote down in my notes is like, not by sight. May we not be led by sight, may we be led by soul. And I think that really trying to ground ourselves to that soul work, it allows you to see through a lot of the facades. But I think that we also have to have the courage then to really call each other out, because it's easy to just live on the mountaintop and be like, oh, it's all soul, it's all the sun and the moon and the stars, and it's all divine. And yeah, you still got to get down. I mean, not everybody's on the mountaintop. And so part of our humanity and being in the world is being of the world. But to have our soul intact, to not let the system grind the soul out of us, that is a big part of, whiteness got no soul. So putting the soul forward is part of that dismantling.
Love it. Love it. All right. Well, that was our first one down. The next 9 they got to come with it, because this was awesome and fantastic. Dr. Watson, we really appreciate your time here with us today. We will definitely be tapping in. March 3rd, we have Dr. Victor Rios. March 10th, we have Dr. Bree Pecauer. March 17th, we have Dean Pedro Noguera. And then March 20th, we have Dr. Benita Love. That's for Dr. Watson series. But you don't want to miss our Diversity Now series as well. Next week, we will be talking about the U.S. prep and our push for equity, diversity, and inclusion in the GSOE, followed by a conversation on February 24th on abolitionist justice with Dr. Mari Gray from Cal State East Bay. So we are a part of this movement of really trying to bring awareness and thought-provoking conversations to this world. And I'm so glad that we were able to start off with you, Dr. Watson.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for everybody in the chat who took time to be on this journey with us. Thank you to Luis and to Michael for holding it down as well. And I appreciate being in community with all of you.
All right, that is it for us. We will see you all next week.